So this thing would not idle. This is the electromagnetic fuel shutoff, which shuts the fuel off at idle. So when it's running, the coil energizes and pulls that plunger in, allowing, apparently in this model, fuel into the idle circuit. It's designed so it stops when you shut the engine off. It goes out, shuts off fuel so it won't diesel or idle on. This one does not work. I applied 12 volts to it and it doesn't move. So that may explain why it's not idling. We're going to do the field modification. We're just going to snip that off, get rid of the spring, and now that will have no effect and it'll plug the hole. Not exactly the right tool for the job, but I'll tighten it for what we need to tighten it. So that'll seal off that. So let me get the battery and we'll start it again. Battery's hooked up. See if the choke functions as it should. Okay, I pulled the throttle out like you normally would and it closed the choke. Let's see if it'll start. See if the accelerator pump does anything. All right, now let's dig into the idle again. So I discovered part of the running problem. Number 4 spark plug was not hooked up. That's the nice thing about these headers. You can just grab each tube and determine which one's not running. In this case, it was number 4. So it starts, doesn't run. It runs better, it doesn't idle. According to the book, the throttle stop, you want it to touch and then you need to come out a quarter turn, and it's nowhere near doing that. So try to follow the correct procedure. Of course, somebody's rounded out this screw rather well. The choke's probably a little bit too aggressive, but I'll deal with that later. Let's turn this some more. Still not quite touching. Okay, it feels like that's touching. We'll call straight up touching, then we'll give it a quarter turn. According to the book, volume screw should be at about 3 turns. You need something better to get in there. So we're on the volume screw. 2.5 to 3 turns is what it says. So there's a half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. And that is where you start adjusting. So let's see if it runs now. Alright, there we go. I'm going to get some stuff, then we'll hook up a tach and dwell meter and set everything else. I figured before we got too far into this, we would check the point gap of the distributor because this vehicle has points. So this is a 4-cylinder engine, there's 4 lobes on the distributor. I have it on top of one of the lobes. This is supposed to be between 16 and 20 thousandths or 4 to 5 millimeters. So there's the 4 millimeter. The lower end seems awful tight, so I'm going to go ahead it snaps closed when I pull it out of there. Let's see what it really is. Let's go down one here. Let's see, about a 13. It might actually be a little bit tight too, so we will go ahead and set it to the 16. Well, you know what? There we go. So, let's see if I remember how to do this. And that screw locks it down. Insert the feeler gauge. Tighten the screw. Still seems kind of tight. Of course, I turned the whole distributor. That's about where we were. So that feels more like it. So we'll try this with the dwell meter hooked up. We want 45 to 50 degrees of dwell. So we want around 50% duty cycle. So let's see what we get, and hopefully it'll start. I haven't moved the distributor too much. Maybe I have. So 52 duty cycle, that should be good. So we have the timing light set up. We'll actually see where the timing is other than just hand timing it. So this is the book I'm using. I've had this for years. It's a Bentley manual, pretty much for a bug. I got it because I have a 74 thing, which I haven't exposed anybody to yet. But somewhere along its lifetime, it had a 009 distributor. I wrote this 7 degrees at idle, 30 degrees total timing in here, from some internet wisdom from somewhere, so we'll go with that. I have the timing light hooked up, and I think I marked that. Yeah, I marked that with some paint the other day. So let's see where our timing is. Since you probably won't be able to hear me, I'll rev it up to about probably 3,000 RPMs and set it from there. Set the total anyway. That's pretty close. I'm going to tighten down the distributor and then we'll work on the carb some more. So maybe we're not done yet. I went for a hot restart and it did not want to stay idling. So I thought, I don't know what led me to this, but I thought I would check the float level, or the fuel level in the flow bowl. That should be roughly 19 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch. And we are way low from there. So apparently you can adjust the flow level by shimming, changing the washer under this needle valve, float valve, inlet valve, whatever you want to call it. First I was suspicious of the fuel pump. appears to be a new fuel pump, but now I'm questioning a little bit of both, so let's check that out. I've disconnected the coil and the fuel pump, so let's see if this thing pumps fuel. Houston, I don't see any fuel coming out. Oh, so that's interesting. So there's the line from the tank. Let's turn the valve on. It's okay, it's not great. So that hose wasn't super tight on there, and it's almost like the clamp's too big for it. So we'll put that back on and just tighten it. Perhaps it was sucking air instead of fuel. So I've tightened the inlet side of the fuel pump hose. It's 5/16 fuel line. It probably needs to be smaller. Let's crank it again and see if anything comes out. Starting to think our fuel pump died. So I've checked the fuel line from the tank to the carb, from the tank to the fuel pump inlet, poured some fuel in the carburetor, and it'll start, and fuel barely dribbles out of the fuel pump. Watch. So I've come to the conclusion that fuel pump is not functioning. Even though it looks new, it is not working. So I have ordered a new one, and once that comes in, we will get that on there, and then we'll continue on with this project. Okay, so I think where we left off, so our fuel pump was no longer pumping. I purchased a new fuel pump, which showed up. Looks a little bit different, but it should perform the same function. It's a little tight in here for my big hands. Get that nut out of there. So I was afraid this might happen. I don't believe that pump's going to come out of there with the intake manifold. Go ahead and remove the hoses. Just maybe that'll give us a little extra clearance. And this 5/16 fuel line is way too big too, so it doesn't collapse very well. It doesn't stick the hose on very well, so I have some 1/4 inch line to go on here. This hose clamp is at the worst possible position. Now let's see if it will come off there. Yes. Not sure what's going on there, but it's like it's pumping now. Now there's a spacer on here. Non-metallic spacer on here. I don't remember if that's supposed to be there or not. Let's turn the engine over and see if that rod actually moves. Don't even know if you can see this. There's the rod. Let's make sure that moves. See if it'll crank with the booster pack. So the rod's moving. Not sure why it wasn't pumping. Off the car, it pumps. Now what I don't know is somehow did this arm slip down below the rod where the rod was past it? Or was there a massive vacuum leak in there that wasn't allowed to pump? I'm not sure. We got a new one, we'll put it on there anyway. So after a brief rainstorm, we're back at it. According to the book, at the highest point, which I've rotated the engine over to it, that fuel pump push rod should project out of there a ½ inch. And that thing is nowhere near a ½ inch out of there. Let's see what it is. That is like 170 thousandths of an inch. So I don't know if there's different thickness spacers that belong in there. According to the book, you just remove gaskets from under it. Let's see how many are under it. It doesn't look like any. I guess this could potentially be doubled up too, but it doesn't look like it. And they have glued that thing down big time. Also, according to the book, you take that spacer off, that push rod could fall into the crankcase and you're splitting the case. But that appears to be in decent shape, unless there's different length push rods. I don't know, something's weird going on. Okay, so tried the new fuel pump, nothing happened. I pulled the push rod out, and I think I showed earlier, but I measured the push rod extended length when it's sitting all the way down in the block. It should be about 13 millimeters or ½ inch above that plate all the way up. This one ended up being 190 thousandths. Didn't think much about it. I thought maybe the fuel pump was defective because the other fuel pump said made in China. But using it by hand, it appeared to work okay. Now this vehicle also has a new carburetor. And the fuel pump is located down there on the engine. The carburetor and the tank are about the same height. So keep all that in mind, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. And plus, we're a little below half tank. So plus, when I ran this earlier, and when I ran it for starting, etc., I was pouring fuel into the carb to get it to run. Keep all that in mind. So we're here in my office. This fuel pump push rod measures, I only have standard calipers, by the way, and I only have the old school analog ones. Funny story about that in a second. So this push rod measures 3 inches 920 thousandths, which is 99.57 millimeters. This push rod should measure 108 millimeters from all the internet perusing I've done, which is 4¼ inches. So the difference between that is 33 thousandths of an inch, or sorry, 330 thousandths of an inch. We add that to the 190 thousandths we had projecting from the block, we get 0.52 inches. Convert that to metrics, and we get 13 millimeters. So near as I can tell, this push rod's way too short, which leads me to believe that it probably ran okay with a full tank of fuel, because enough fuel would flow through the carburetor, would flow from the tank down to the carburetor to make it run. Also, probably why there's a new fuel pump and a new carburetor. Looks to me like the tip of that is worn off. The images I've seen, that's more pointed, almost like a pencil, or close to it. So I think something wore this off, and once it wore through the hardened end of it, it just kept on wearing. And it doesn't, and honestly I would think too also that these would typically rotate just like a push rod when it's installed. And see the wear mark on there is nice and flat, if you can see that. So it's pushing, but it wasn't rotating. So now I need to go search for a new fuel pump push rod. Oh, the funny story about the analog calipers is I would purchase at work digital ones, metric, standard, digital readout, and use them all the time. And no matter what I did, they kept getting stolen. So what I figured out is people don't know how to use these, so they don't steal them. So I've been waiting like 2 weeks for the fuel pump push rod to show up, and there it is. The first one I ordered never showed up. It's still sitting in a post office somewhere in Ohio, so I ordered another one. And I don't know if you can see this on camera. How much longer that is. And that measures right at 4 1/4 inches, so that should fix our fuel delivery problem. Hole in that gasket looks like it's a little bit too small. So we'll just help it a little bit. There we go. Now there's actually some spring pressure on there. We're all hooked up. Let's see if it'll run. We got nothing. So I have 10 volts to the coil, but nothing happening here at the starter. Aha. It's quite possible that my starter wire is off from the switch. That thing is pretty loose, but I only have 10 volts in my booster pack, so you may not want to start with that. Okay, now that we've proven it will crank, let me make sure I turn the fuel on. That'll be a big help. Alright, accelerator pump's squirting, so it should start. Alright, so I need to take the battery out of the truck again. Fresh battery, let's see what it'll do. Okay, well now at least idles. They wanted about 900. We're close to that once it idles down. So it runs. I have reset the choke. Let's see how it starts up. So I think that's good enough for now. So it runs. It could probably use some further tune-up and refinement. So up next, I guess we'll tackle brakes or lack thereof and see what we can do with the body, the wiring, the seats. The list just goes on and on. Thanks for watching. So as a side note, I did run across in the book where the push rod for the fuel pump for the angled style fuel pump, I guess it would be equipped with the generator, is actually shorter. This, which is, should be, according to the book, 3 and 15/16 or whatever the metric equivalent is. So that is 3.9375 or close to it. So the composite, it's a little bit short. It's about 3.92. I don't have enough hands. So it's possible that this is just the wrong push rod and it's not screwed up, but it's for one with an angled fuel pump and an alternator.